December 12th, 1999, the last of the waking up classes, class number 7. Well, good afternoon. This will definitely be our last class in this series of classes on waking up, which I didn't know what it was all about when we began the series, but it's real clear now that what this is all about is the making the transition from having our consciousness immersed in the human consciousness to having our consciousness in God. Mostly what's come out in this class is the reasons for doing that, the principles for doing that, why you'd want to do that, what that statement means, which is to say this series of classes has been about the underlying principles of and the actual practice of metaphysical and a mystical study, and primarily a mystical study. This class is about the actual practice. This class is going to be called treatment. Last class was about healing principles, and this class will be about treatment. And treatment is the activity that we engage in spiritual healing. It's also the activity that we engage in what Joel called protective work. And it's the activity that we engage in what Joel calls world work. And it's also supply work, and it's also all of our work. There is no work that we do that isn't some aspect of what I'm calling treatment, which is essentially what Joel calls treatment. I put the healing principles up on the whiteboard there that we went over last week, or last class. And these give us the foundation for treatment. And just to get them on the tape, the first principle is that God constitutes individual consciousness. And that means that God constitutes your consciousness and my consciousness. Consciousness is really the same word as spiritual. When we say God is spiritual, when we say God is consciousness, we're talking about exactly the same thing. And the point is that God not only constitutes our consciousness, but God is consciousness, God is spiritual, all there is consciousness, all there is spirituality, so that's all of us that there is the consciousness which God constitutes. So God is the substance of us and the nature of us. The second principle is what I call the primary metaphysical principle, and that is that mind is matter. And what that means is that whatever is in your consciousness is manifested within mind as matter. In other words, what you see is what you believe. It's not that seeing is believing, it's that believing is seeing. Whatever is in your consciousness is what you experience. And the third principle that we brought up last class is that error is in human consciousness. The nature of human consciousness is human minds broadcasting to each other all the lies about there being other powers than God and other substances than God and other laws than God and another existence other than the spiritual existence, the consciousness which is God. And I've added a fourth principle up there. There is no error in God, and I just put that up there so that to remind you that the nature of God is omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence and harmony and bliss, and the nature of God is outside of time and space, is above time and space. So all of time and space and all of this experience that we're having is not the nature of God. That's all in mind. That's all in human consciousness. God is eternal. And there is no error in God. There's no flaws in God, because if there were errors in God, if there was sickness in God, then there'd be death in God. And if there was death in God, then God would not be eternal. God is this eternal, unchanging, and it's silly to talk about the nature of God, except that you have to say something for the sake of the class. But God is an eternal, unchanging, based in love, based in harmony, to realize your reality as God is a blissful state. So if we look at these four healing principles now, what we get is that if your consciousness is associated with human consciousness, you're experiencing error, or you can potentially experience error. You're experiencing the nature of humanity, and the nature of humanity is what's in human consciousness, and that's multiple powers. You know, the powers of, well, we've said before, all the powers, the power of disease. Germs cause diseases, infection cause diseases, epidemics exist, stock markets crash, and they go up. I mean, health is part of human consciousness just like disease, and being wealthy is part of human consciousness just like having lack. All these things are in human consciousness. But the point is that if you're in human consciousness, then you're in the statistical games, and your success or failure may be, by success or failure, what I mean is your happiness, your bliss, your serenity may be a function of the length of your lifeline in your palm, depending on whether you're attaching yourself to the astrology or palmistry laws. You know, there are as many laws as you can imagine, numerology, and all of these laws are laws if you believe them. If they're in your consciousness, these are laws. And it's true that if you believe you're a human being and you go into a room where there are people who have an infectious disease, there's a statistical probability that you will catch that disease. Now, if your consciousness is in God, then your experience will be one that reflects the nature of God, or your own real nature. Joel says on one of the tapes I was hearing recently, it's interesting that at that time he said 70 years, I think, so let's make that now 120 years of people doing spiritual healing, from the very first Christian Scientists and unity people. People have been doing spiritual healing for a century, and they've been going into rooms where people have infectious diseases, and there is not a single case recorded of anybody who was a spiritual healing ever contracting the disease. The odds of you catching a disease if your consciousness in God are zero, because the laws that are active in your life are the laws of God, and God's law is eternality and unchangeability. You are immortal. The nature of us is immortality, and there is nothing that can affect our true being. Our true being is eternal and changeless. It is this awareness which we're experiencing right now. The trouble is that we're not identifying with the awareness, we're identifying with this body that we're aware of, and with the thoughts within that body that we're aware of. And if we were to identify with the awareness itself, that would be much closer to the truth than identifying with this body. Yeah.
When I look at those healing principles, I see God constitutes individual consciousness, and that God is all there is, and that consciousness is all there is. And when I look at mind as matter, that just tells me that consciousness is just out picturing like a mirror. Whatever's in your consciousness is going to be outside of you. Once again, saying that consciousness is all there is. And then it says there's no error in God, and there's no error because consciousness is all there is. And then, so then when I see error in human consciousness, there can be no human consciousness, because consciousness is all there is, and God is all there is. So there is no human consciousness, and there is no error.
That's true. But there is the appearance of human consciousness, and there is the appearance of error, because we, in our unenlightened state, have chosen to identify our identity with this human physicality, this psychosomatic human mechanism, rather than with our true God nature. It is a lie. It is not happening. It has never happened. It never will happen. It has all the reality of the water on the road in the desert. And it has all the impact of the water on the road in the desert. But when you drive out to the desert and you see the water on the road and you believe in it, you stop. Because you don't want to submerge your car. If you know the truth, you drive through and you discover there never was any water on the road. It was just an appearance. You also discover that the appearance had no effect on the road. It didn't touch the road. There was no impact on the road. In fact, there never was any water. Okay? In exactly the same sense that there was no water on that road, there is no error. What we have is a way of seeing the current content of our consciousness. And we really don't want to get into the long story about why it is that we're playing this game, but the Leelaa, the game is being played, and we come in with apparently a state of consciousness which is limited. And we evolve through lifetime after lifetime. And mind is this mechanism which allows us to experience the current content of our consciousness so that we can learn the errors that we are currently believing and grow. Now, it's all Leelaa and none of it is happening. It's all unreal. And you could, in this minute, see through the whole thing and burst out laughing and be done with it. I spent those years with Robert, and it was so clear with me that Robert never thought that body I was sitting next to was him. He was not confused about who he was. He knew he was the awareness and thought that this series of pictures was sort of interesting, but it wasn't him. It was just the Leelaa. It was just a game going on, like going to the movie and watching the movie or getting caught up in the movie. Robert never got caught up in the movie. Now we're caught up in the movie and identifying with the characters in the movie. Or the other possibility, if you think about it as a play, and you're an actress. And so you put on a costume and you go into the play and you're doing the part, you're carrying out the role in the play, and you get all caught up in the play and you forget you're an actress. You become the being in the play. It's like that. Now, if you were the actress, if you remembered that you were the actress, then you would be watching the role you were playing happen, and if somebody said things to you, well, it's part of the play. It has no impact on you. If somebody shoots you in the play, it's part of the play. It has no impact on you because you know that that role is not you. Our error is that we're identifying with the role we're playing. We think we're this body, this psychosomatic mechanism. And there's no way out of it intellectually. There's no way out of it by reasoning. I can give you 10,000 examples and bore us all to tears, and it will not help a bit. The way out of this is to have that realization, to see it. Oh, and you all have clicks, I know, and you see more and more, so you know the process I'm talking about, and what you have to do is see it and just drop the whole thing. All right, so that's the background, and that brings us to treatment. Treatment is the activity of taking your consciousness out of the human picture and aligning it with God. Treatment is the idea of the practice of treatment is the practice of lifting yourself from the human picture to the realized consciousness. Treatment is a practice in which you practice. It's like going to a gym. It's a practice that you do every day to lift yourself as high as you can, and lift yourself as high as you can, and lift yourself as high as you can, and realize as much as you can, and remember all the things that are lies, and remember that they're lies, and know the truth, and see what you can realize. And that's what treatment is. Now, if we usually think of treatment in the sense of spiritual healing, and spiritual healing is the following situation. Somebody comes to you and asks you to give them some help with let's say the flu. And right now you're presented with the human condition. Here's a person who thinks she has the flu, And she's telling you, I have the flu. And she's asking you to believe the human condition that there is flu, and that that there is a power of flu, and that you have to go through flu. And she's saying, I don't believe it, but she obviously does believe it because she has it, and it's out picturing. And she's asking you for help. Now, what you have to do, the activity of treatment, is to look at that situation and know immediately that it's unreal. It's like the water on the road. You come over the hill and look down in the desert and you see the water on the road and you say, no, that's nonsense, and you keep driving, and by golly, the road's dry all the way to the horizon. When somebody comes to you and asks for treatment, the idea is to recognize that that's not the truth. Okay, that's the first step. The next step is to then lift yourself to where you realize the truth. The truth is that there is only God, and God is the reality, the true nature of this person who has come to you and says she has the flu. The reality of this person is God consciousness. Is spiritual, can't possibly have the flu. Is God, can't possibly therefore have any sickness. Is immortal, is harmonious, is perfection, is godlike. And realizing this, in the realization of this, I mean, when you become consciously aware of it, as distinct from knowing it in your intellect, when you become consciously aware of it, then the person who has come to you, having associated their consciousness with you, may get lifted up to that point too. And if they get lifted up to where they're consciously aware of that, then that's what outpictures in mind, because mind is matter, the sick body is just the reflection of the current belief. So when the belief is changed as a result of the conscious awareness, then the picture must change. And that's what treatment is all about. And of course, it depends. I mean, obviously, the most important thing here is the ability of the healer to raise him or herself. The most important, the operative thing is how high can the healer raise him or herself? And how, and if I be lifted up, then I can lift you up. How high can I lift myself up? And then how high can I lift you up? And if I can lift you up, then there's a healing. And if I can't, then there isn't. Or we should say, to the extent that I can, there is. Okay? So that's what the healing practice is all about. Now, the purpose of healing is not to heal the person, because there never was a sick person. The rule one about healing is there's nothing to heal. So the purpose of healing is not to lift up not to heal the person or to make the symptoms go away. Although that's the carrot that brings people in originally. The real purpose of the healing is to have the real purpose of the treatment is to have the realization. Even if you are not having a lot of good results with your healing work, it's still very important to do the healing work, because that's how you build muscle and lift yourself up to where you can do really good healing work. We always think of Joel having 150 patients a day and an 80% success rate, which lets you know that the amount of time it took him for a healing is a minute. And I certainly don't know anybody who has anything like that at all, but Joel worked 16 years working on that consciousness before he published The Infinite Way in 45, and we're talking about his success rate in 1960. So this is a man who's been healing 100 people a day for 25 years. And he had a very exceptional initial click realization back in 1919, or 1929, I guess it was, when he had quite a realization and became a healer. So he really had from 30 years or so of working on that consciousness. If you really need a healing and you got a hotline to Jesus, ask Jesus. I mean, because this was a miraculous healings on the spot. If not, and you got a hotline to Joel, go to Joel. If not, the point is go to the person who has worked in this field longest, and who has worked in the field most successfully and has done more work and has spent more time lifting themselves up so that they can lift you up. And you will have different results with different teachers, and depending on how much work they've done. Also, your client can cling to their disbelief, can cling to their error, to their belief in the error, and refuse to be lifted up, and that also is a problem, although Joel obviously overcame that 80% of the time. But here again, Joel had a better shot at it than most of us, because the people that came to Joel believed he could do it. Jesus said, "Do you believe I can do this?" And they said yes, and then he healed them. So, it helps a lot. The client's belief in the practice has a lot to do with it. I mean, first of all, nobody's coming to you asking for a spiritual healing if they don't have some level of belief in it. But I guess my point is that it's a developed consciousness, and the purpose of doing it is not to heal people, but is to develop the consciousness, both in the practitioner and in the client. And if you're doing this work and you don't lift your client up to where your client has a realization, then you haven't done anything more for them than giving them an aspirin. The point is all about raising your own consciousness and theirs. Now, there's two other topics that Joel brings up that are really that are treatment. One is protective work. And protective work is personal work rather than work for another. And protective work, just as healing is not healing, because the first rule of healing is that nobody needs healing, that there's nothing to heal. The first rule of protective work is there is nothing to protect yourself against. There is no power outside of God, and God is this harmonious, perfect power. The purpose of protective work, you can think of it, and the name comes from protecting yourself from the effects of believing, of accepting the lies in human consciousness. What you're protecting yourself from is this mesmeric, subliminal broadcast of human consciousness. And the work is just exactly the same as it is for healing work. The work is to lift yourself up to a point where you know the truth, where you lift yourself and you do this in the morning. But before you start out the day, lift yourself up as high as you can. Know the truth. Know that God is the only power. And what you're doing is you are infusing your own consciousness with truth so that human consciousness cannot infiltrate your consciousness and cause error. But it's the same thing. It's refusing to believe the error, and it's lifting yourself up to believe the truth. And you do the same thing during the day when you see error. You correct it within yourself. If you see a sick person, there's the comment in the Bible, and I don't remember the story, but about seeing the sick man on the road, do you walk by on the other side? And the answer is you correct it in your own mind. Now, if they haven't asked you for a healing, you don't give them healings, because people have complete freedom and complete right to live and die by their own beliefs. But if I see an error, if I see a person is obviously suffering disease or lack or had an injury or anything like that, I have to correct it in my own self and know immediately within my own self that this is not true, that this is not happening, that this is just hypnotic belief. And just know quietly in my own self what the truth is and do a little work on myself. So to the point that I stop believing in it. If I believe it, if I buy it, if I don't walk by, if I do walk by on the other side, so to speak, if I believe it, I'm setting myself up for it. If I see a homeless person, I can become homeless. If I see an unemployed person, I can become unemployed. What was the great one on Barbara's tape talking on the non-negotiable? If I see a fat person, I'm available to get fat. If I see perfection, I'm available for perfection. So the daily work is policing your own mind. And as you police your own mind and your own consciousness, and your consciousness grows, then people will start to come to you to get help. They will be drawn to you to get help in lifting them in the same way that people start coming to you just to be lifted, whether it be a physical healing or just out of whatever grinding them down. You know, I get calls for healing, and sometimes people keep calling, so I assume they feel like they're getting some results from it, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, as far as I can tell. But everybody that goes for the hour walk with me on the Strand comes back feeling a lot better. Okay? They've been lifted up. And that's healing work. That's consciousness. What they do is, I hear their problems, and I know they're not problems. You know, I'm real clear about a lot of things. And every time people walk with me take an hour walk with me on the Strand, they come back feeling better. They come back feeling that their problems aren't such problems. And this is the lifting up. So, it's a practice. And the third area in which Joel talks about treatment is in world work. Now, world work is no different. And if you recognize that human consciousness is people's beliefs broadcasting around this closed circuit called human consciousness, and that this is the thing that's causing the mesmeric effect on us, then obviously we're thinking into human consciousness. If we're thinking truth into human consciousness, then we're changing the content of human consciousness. And if there are people thinking truth into human consciousness, that's also broadcasting around. One of Joel's, and maybe Joel's hugest contribution is that having had this realization, he then traveled around the world year after year after year, teaching classes, to 50,000 students and publishing 30 books and all this. And what he was doing was pumping this information into into human consciousness, into mind. And the result is that, we've covered this material in 7 classes instead of 7 years. Because it's in human consciousness, it's much easier to believe. It used to take him a week to overcome the initial inertia of his class and get the first sentence heard. And now he's been going around pumping this stuff in for a long time, and it gets easier. And I also know, I've been at this for a long time, and I see people getting where I've gotten much faster than I got there, because I got there, and because all the other people with me got there. So world work is just pumping truth into human consciousness, and it's like tithing, sort of. It's like, an idea would be to set aside 1 meditation a day. And we're talking like 5 minutes. Set aside 1 meditation a day to know some truth of the world. And generally, you might want to pick a topic to know the truth at, like the war in Bosnia, or know the truth about, when there's a civil war going on somewhere, you can know that all there is one. You might want to know the truth about corrupt politicians. You might want to know the truth about our court system. You might want to know the truth about the potential hurricane in Jamaica. You might, because violent weather is human error. That's not harmony. Anything that's not harmony is human error, is a belief in human power. So essentially, what I would say is anything that gives you a little glitch in your stomach, anything that irritates you out there in the world, is something to practice healing on, because if it's irritating you a little bit, you're buying it, and it's a good place to do some healing on yourself on. And also, it's a good idea to pump it into world work. And it really does make a difference. They sometimes call these collective meditations, like they did for the Bosnia situation, and we see results from those when they call worldwide meditations every day at noon for 3 days or 4, and things change. That's also why praying to God sometimes heals people. People always say, well, if there's really no God active, no withholding God, or no giving God, how come? Why do we pray for people who are sick? And my answer is you don't pray for people who are sick. You do healing work. But they say, well, prayer works. People get together and pray for people, and they get well. And the answer is you get enough people believing that prayer will make somebody well, and it manifests. It's not that God has been talked into saving this person because this many people think they're a neat person. It's because if enough people believe somebody's going to get well, they're going to get well. So I mean, it works. It really does. So that's what world work is all about. But the point of this whole class is, my shirt says suffering is optional. The point of this whole class has been that you can choose to be a pinball in human consciousness, rattling around the cage and taking whatever befalls you and bouncing about, or you can do the work and align your consciousness with God and have a experience that is as harmonious as you have to this point realized. And that's what this class has been all about. It's been to lay down the principles for doing this kind of work. The good news is you don't have to have the full-on white flashing light type realization to change your life. Every lie in your consciousness that you eliminate will change the picture, because it must. It's just a reflection. It's just like a mirror. If I go up to a mirror and shave one side of my beard, in that minute, in the mirror, that side of my beard will be shaved, and the other side won't. And but the point is that as I change the content of my consciousness, as I increase my realization of my oneness with God, then my picture must change, because I'm looking at it in mind, and mind is just a tool that manifests my beliefs in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah, I started talking to you when I first came in about a couple weeks ago. I felt like my body was getting this blue thing, and it was weird because just before that we had a class, and I told you about this shard of stone I got stuck in my eye, and I was able to get into meditation, and that kind of went away, and everything seemed to be healed. And then right after that, I felt like I was getting sick with the flu. And while you were talking, I just realized what was going on with that. And I came home from work and just took it easy. And the next day, I really didn't take it easy. I worked around my own house. But while you were talking, I realized that, this whole time that I felt sick, I knew that it was just my body. But then it just dawned on me that, I kind of wanted to be in that place, because I was really enjoying being home for a while and not being on the go so much. And I had my cats with me, and that's where I needed to be, evidently. And I was going to call you, and I didn't.
But the other flaw was even earlier. You knew it was just your body. No, that's not your body. That's your concept of your body. You don't have a physical body, healthy or sick. That's your concept, your current concept of your perfect spiritual being, perfect spiritual body. So you've already bought the error. Your question earlier was, I wanted to do it myself and I didn't have much success. The problem is, in doing it for ourselves, is by the time we decide we need a healing, we've bought that we have a problem. And buying that you have a problem is what needs. You can do it. You can overcome it sometimes, but it's much easier to ask somebody else who hasn't bought the lie to lift you and be available for the lifting. I would say, if you've been diagnosed as having prostate cancer, go to a woman practitioner. She will know very clearly that she does not have prostate cancer. And that's, and similarly, if you have breast cancer, go to a male practitioner, because, very few men. The fact is, go to somebody outside of yourself and get lifted. And if Joel says often the most important thing in doing healing work is your initial reaction. When somebody comes to you with a claim, your immediate reaction has to be, Maya, hypnosis, nonsense. You have to not to them. You don't look at the guy and say nonsense. But you immediately have to know nonsense in your mind and know immediately that this is just a lie that's being presented to you. You're being tempted now to believe, know the truth about it, and thank them very kindly and go do your work quietly. But you have to know that immediately. And otherwise, the first part of your healing treatment will be in overcoming your own initial error. And the other thing you have to do that's very difficult for me is to not want to heal them. Because if you want to fix them, you've bought it. But there's something wrong. What you have to do is hear the lie and go realize the nature of God and have no outlining about what should happen, have no picture about what should happen, not want them to get well, not want the fever to go from 104 to 101, and not feel good if it goes down to 101, because that means you're believing in fever and that there is one. What you have to do is know the truth about God. You immediately, Joel talks about the two stages of healing. The first is impersonalization. The first stage is you realize that the person has nothing to do with it, it's just human consciousness. There's no error in this person. This person doesn't have a bad belief or a bad this or a bad that. I mean, they don't. It's not like Christian Science where, your anger is causing your cancer and your resentment is causing your goiters or whatever. Whatever they used to have a series of. It's not in the person. The only error the person has made is ignorance. Is accepting. Is letting the subliminal presentation of human consciousness come in. So the first thing you do is just recognize that it has nothing to do with the person and throw them out of your consciousness. The second thing he calls is nothingization, and then that is to realize that human consciousness has no power, no law, no truth, no yada yada yada. So this is just mesmeric lies being passed around in consciousness. And there's no target to it, and there's no source, there's no organization. It's not like a group of people have targeted somebody with, there's just no source, there's no target, there's no law, there's no power, there's no nothing to it. It's nothing. Okay? Away with it. So now I forget about Chuck and I forget about flu, and I realize truth about God. And I lift myself by recognizing that God is the only power and the only creator and has created no powers outside of itself, and God is harmonious and God is eternal and God is blissful, and I may recognize that I am the Christ and I and my creator are one and it is the one and its nature is mine, and I may go any place that I may go, but it's all now about God. And the reason I'm knowing that I am the Christ is because if I am the Christ, so must you be. What's true about me is true about everyone. So knowing that, I can realize truth about myself and I can realize truth about God and lift myself up. And you do that until you have the realization, until you, as Barbara would say, drop all concern about the flu. When you can drop all concern, you go to the quiet place, then that treatment is done. And if it comes up again, every time it represents itself to you, if the thought in my mind comes to my mind, I wonder how Chuck's doing, I just bought it. And nope, all there is God, and God, and yada yada yada, and I can't get locked into just hoping your fever's down, or anything like that. But that's the kind of thing that the process is all about. It's much easier to get help on yourself. Because the initial work should not be as much trying to heal yourself as trying to do protective work to prevent the problems, because it's much easier to know the truth about a problem you don't have than one you appear to have. It's a lot easier to realize, when the people at your work cafeteria are talking about the presence, the frequency of how much cancer there is around. It's much easier right then to know that that's a lie and do your protective work right there and know the truth about that. And instead of saying, oh yeah, I'm becoming a statistical candidate for cancer or whatever. And when they bring the flu shots around, you can either take a flu shot and become a candidate, or you can do some protective work and know the truth and not. And it's a discipline. But it's this discipline, that lifts us. It's interesting that we're now talking about the work, and there are so few of us here today. Everybody else is off doing their Christmas thing or doing their party thing, or they're attached and they're out in the Maya and they're doing their thing and missing the one session which is about the work. Yeah.
Wait, you said have Joel or Jesus come with you? Would you explain that a little more, please?
I said if you have a contact with Jesus, he would be the one to ask to heal because he had such a great healing record. I'm not saying that I do or that you can even. That's up to you. Certainly, lots of masters have seen other masters who apparently have left their body. Jesus certainly was seen on earth after he left his body. Joel has told students after he left his body that he was available to them. Joel has certainly talked with Barbara many times after he left his body, and Joel has told Barbara that he is available to her serious students to give direct help. The fact that Joel is one of God's individual expressions of consciousness means, how can, and that's eternal, how can Joel not be here? I mean, the body that Joel was wearing clearly has been cremated or buried or something, but that has nothing to do with anything. The fact is that when your body is done, you're not. You're eternal. You were never born, you will never die. And you do not exist as a human being right now in this moment. One of Robert's principles is, I was never born, I will never die, and I do not prevail now. There never was a Lee. The being here is eternal. So,
We're all God.
Exactly, expressions of God. And so is Joel. So Joel is eternally present. Or not Joel, but that consciousness which dressed up as Joel for that lifetime. That consciousness is certainly here. But the particular, the individualization, the individual consciousness that became Joel may be different from the individual consciousness expression of God that became Jesus, although both of them had the same level of consciousness. Both of them had the same awareness, but in any event, certainly the consciousness that was Joel is available. I have certainly had felt the presence and the love of Robert after he died. Just no question about it. So yeah, go to Joel. Go wherever you're led.
Okay, so it's like a Maya that I believe that my lungs are hurt, right? So that's the lie. But I believe that my lungs have a cold or whatever, right?
That's a lie. The belief that you have lungs
is a lie.
Is a lie.
Okay.
The belief that you have healthy lungs after the healing is a lie.
Okay, well, since I believe the lie, then if I were to ask you to do a healing on my lungs and believe that I am in the lie, then that healing would be able to take place then?
If you ask one of us for help, we might say, yeah, we'll give you a healing in your lungs, but the first thing that one of us would do would be to forget all about you and lungs and know who you really are. And if I could realize who you really are, see who you really are, and you had associated your consciousness with mine by reaching out to me, then when I realize my oneness with God, that will also be your oneness with God. And when you realize your oneness with God, then the outpicturing in mind would have to be one that more reflected the nature of God, which is to say a harmonious outpicturing. Now there's still going to be an outpicturing in matter because we're still playing this silly Leelaa game, but if your consciousness is in God, then the picture will reflect that belief about yourself, which would be a harmonious belief. And what would happen is that there would still appear to be a Karen with lungs, but they would be healthy, harmonious lungs.
Okay. And so the work to be able to get there would be more or less in your meditation of lifting your consciousness to being with one with
That's right.
God. Mm-hmm. And just doing that in your meditation?
Practice in your meditations. You might want to look at the Joel's book, The Art of Spiritual Healing, and you might want to look at Joel's book, The Realization of Oneness, which is really one of the 1962 or 63 letters, but it's really the second book on healing.